You know, it's funny, the last time I saw my little brother alive, he actually died in a airplane crash soon after this conversation. We went to dinner together, and he said, you know, we are so lucky because we had such a great childhood. And you know, it's funny, I hadn't thought about that. And he said, you know, not everybody gets to have a great childhood. And I had a great childhood. I really did. My grandparents were very nurturing, and we spent a lot of time with my grandparents on weekends. And and it's funny, like one grandmother, we would read poetry out loud. And she said poetry is meant to be read out loud. So I grew up reading out loud Walt Whitman and Robert Frost and Edgar Allan Poe and T.S. Eliot. And it was just fun. And then the rest of the time we played cards. So either reading poetry or playing canasta. And my mother, Emma Sue Gibson was her maiden name. She was a character. And a real character. She was funny. She was hilarious. She taught speech and English, and she was creative. And so early on, like when I was from about the age of, I think it was about 10, 11, 12, she and I did the mama and daughter routine, and we went around to all these women's clubs in Western Kentucky and gave little speeches, and Mother wrote them all out, and I got the funny lines. But you think it was really confidence building for me, but it was a lot of fun because here's a mother and a daughter going out and giving little speeches that were funny. Like, Mom, you don't understand. And I'd make fun of her songs and she'd make fun of mine.
Were you singing?
No. I mean, I'm just at the era of her songs. And it was, but I mean, that was great. My dad was smart. He was smart, and he was such a good parent. He was, you couldn't have had a better father, Dan Hudson, than I had. And my brother and I drove each other crazy, but that's to be expected. And so I just can't complain. I was in Western Kentucky. It was a very small college town. We did a lot on the lake. We water skied. I knew from the beginning that I was going to grow up, go to college, and I wanted to teach at a college. I mean, it was just because that's what my mother had done, and so that's what I wanted to do. And we were really lucky. And then where I've been so lucky is that I had, a whole family of role models. And then I married a guy, met him in college, Steve Selwitz, and it keeps me grounded. So this flitty, creative part of my mother that I got some of it, unfortunately not quite enough. And but he keeps me grounded, and he's considerate, and he's just been the perfect person for me. I don't know if I can say for him, but certainly for me. And we've been together since '71, so I sort of grew up with him as well. I took school very seriously. And I think it's because one of my grandfathers early on would give me a silver dollar if I got an A. So I took school very seriously. I always studied. So I didn't go to college and have to learn how to study. I'd already learned how to study. And so I liked school. I liked learning, but I wasn't scholarly. I mean, this is a small West Kentucky, listen to this accent, West Kentucky town. It wasn't like my family sat around and thought great intellectual conversations at night over dinner. We were just a small town family. I thought my mother had the perfect life. She taught English and speech at a college, so I wanted to teach English and speech. So my major, I actually had a double major, this won't surprise you, drama and speech, and I had a minor in education. But I had wanted to grow up to be a speech teacher. It's hard to explain to people what research administration is, and it was just an accident. I got a graduate fellowship at the Research Administration Office at the University of Kentucky. went. They liked me. I liked them. They said, well, would you like a job? And I went and thought about it, talked to my husband, and we thought, well, money might be a nice thing to add to our lives. And so I said, sure. And I was in grants and contracts, and then wasn't doing at all what I do now. And then at one time, out of the blue, the big boss, and I was afraid of the big boss, but he called me down. I thought, oh gosh, what's going to happen? And he said, we've got this little thing. It's called an IRB. I didn't even know what an IRB was. And he said, we want you to take it over. And that's how I made the move into responsible conduct of research issues. And what was so great about it is that Kentucky truly, as an employee of the University of Kentucky, they really let me grow professionally. So I wanted to apply for a fellowship in D.C., which meant I was going to be out of the office for the summer, and they said, that's what you want to do, try it. I did. I got it. I went to D.C. And developed a booklet that talked about human research protection and how each different federal agency protected human subjects. And this was in 1986. And so it was just a wonderful experience. And that's what shifted my career, because I think the issues related to human research protection are fascinating.
Can you remember what you thought or what your expectations were about research and protection of human subjects when you first started, and maybe how the reality was different than your expectations?
Well, my expectations are still changing. And I've been involved with human research protection since 1979, which is a pretty long time, and they're continually changing. When I started, I didn't have any expectations. Matter of fact, when I started, I remember my boss said, well, now this is a policy, and I didn't understand what was a policy versus what's a procedure. I mean, I really didn't. And certainly protection of human subjects, even understanding research and research design, that's something that over time I've learned. So my expectations have changed dramatically since 1979, and in this current environment of change in human research protection, they're continually changing. What's the most important thing in my job? Well, why do I like doing it? Well, one of the reasons I really like doing it is helping and working with people that are advancing their career. So I'm very committed to protecting human subjects, very committed to promoting research, and very committed to helping people that are involved in this profession. And when I started, I went to my first PRIM&R meeting in fall of '79. Isn't that amazing? And when I went, no one could understand what I did, because they'd say, well, now, are you the IRB Institutional Review Board chair? I said, no. Well, then you're the secretary. And I said, no, we have a full-time secretary and we have a chair. Well, then what do you do? Because at that point, there wasn't the role of professional administrators to assist with the process. And so I have to give University of Kentucky credit for having the vision, which they did. They had the vision to have those kinds of positions as early as 1979. So I came from a slightly different model than everybody else, and over time, through PRIM&R, through a group called ARENA, Applied Research Ethics National Association, we worked to develop a profession for managing and assisting in the administration of human research. And it's been a huge change, but it's something that I've really enjoyed watching that change, and have embraced it and tried to help facilitate the change.
So you are one of the founders of this as a profession.
I don't think of Ada Sue as a founder. I would like to say that I'm a facilitator, that I help facilitate, and I have worked hard to help educate both people that outside of the profession and people inside the profession. Everything is so complex now from a scientific standpoint. You need to start this with some type of philosophy. Like, what's your philosophy toward human research protection? Okay. And it really, over time, I didn't start there. Over time, I've become very committed to protecting human volunteers, and very committed. My philosophy, and I can articulate it for you, is to promote research within the current ethical, legal, regulatory framework, and to try to shape that framework at the national level. Now, I didn't start with that philosophy. It wasn't until I was about in my 40s. All right? I mean, I've been in the business about 20 years before I began to realize, but I am very committed. So that shapes the decisions I make. Decisions I make at work, decisions I make in working with young research administrators. Because I think it's very important that you try to promote research. I value research. I need research. My family needs research, all right, to promote research, but within an ethical and legal regulatory framework. But the challenge that has come is that framework is not static. That's change work. It changes. And even in some areas, like, it'll get really restrictive, and then in other areas, suddenly it opens up. And there's all this constant change. So you have to learn, where is the framework as a research administrator? That's one challenge. Then, so what is that framework? And then, why do we have it? So that's a huge challenge. It's not just learning what are the rules, but why are they there, and what are the ethical reasons why those rules are important? And once the research administrator begins to get that and can explain not just the what, but also the why, it really, you can be much more effective in helping the system, helping protect subjects, and facilitating research. So you got the what and the why. And then the next challenge is having the patience to apply it. And this isn't true. This may surprise you, but I have a quote that I keep in my office, and it's by Mark Twain. Okay. And it goes, "We are all ignorant. It's just about different subjects." Okay, so I'm not a surgeon. I don't have a PhD in biochemistry. And many of these researchers know so much that I don't know, and I admire what they can do. Likewise, they don't necessarily, at least in our current system, when they get their advanced degree, they hear, they'll have a little bit about ethics, but they don't come into research with a huge background in ethics or a huge background in the regulatory requirements. And keep in mind that framework is changing constantly. So I think the challenge is learning the what, understanding the why, being able to communicate that effectively and patiently, all right? Not to assume that, well, how can they not understand that? Well, why can't I understand how to do surgery? There's this interplay. That's, all right, that was my philosophy, and I think research administrators need to recognize that they develop a philosophy. Since I'm director of the office at the University of Kentucky, it is also the University of Kentucky's, that's my mission statement from my office.
You have little pins that you pass. You were very succinct when you stated that.
Yeah, it's something that every new employee in my office is told, that we're there to promote research within this ethical, legal, regulatory framework, and that we shape it at the national level. And that's a lot of Ada Sue's personality. But luckily, my husband, Steve Selwitz, has been very supportive of me being this committed and spending all the extra time. And the University of Kentucky has been willing to allow me to try to shape the framework, not just at the University of Kentucky level, but at the national level, and I'm grateful for both of those. But yes, that translates into customer service. that translates into within that framework, and we've got to always, that framework represents what we're doing to protect our human volunteers. But within that framework, we can bend over backwards to try to not put up unnecessary, bureaucratic, silly barriers that really do nothing to protect human subjects and just slow down research.
How do you reconcile the fact that the parameters or the framework changes so frequently?
Well, and again, it depends on what aspect of the framework we're talking about that changes. If you talk about ethical principles, often the ethical principles don't change that dramatically. But the federal regulatory interpretation of those principles do, and they change constantly. And then you add to it the system changing. And science drives a lot of the changes. Science and technology really has changed how we have, it has not changed the ethical principles as much as it's changed how we apply those to human research protection. And you just whole genome sequencing, whole additional layer of ethical issues to sort through. Internet research, how do you protect privacy and confidentiality? And is it as important to protect privacy and confidentiality, or is it even more important in this technological age? What about returning research results to human volunteers? When is it ethically appropriate? When is it not? I mean, that's a huge ethical issue that changes, and so we'll grapple with it, and eventually, as a society or as a community, we'll begin to reach some consensus, and so then that consensus becomes part of our new framework. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. What has been the response of other people in the field when you try to explain your philosophy to them? I mean, it sounds like University of Kentucky, you're the boss, so they're accepting it, but what about other people outside of your circle?
My philosophy doesn't have to be everybody's. And on the other hand, I think my philosophy is lots of other people's. I mean, I don't think that what I've described is unique. I think very successful programs, human research protection programs, try to promote research within the current ethical, legal, regulatory framework. So I can't say that it's strictly mine. It's certainly how I've articulated it over the years. But it's, I think, fairly well accepted, because if your attitude is, I don't care about research, I only care about protecting subjects, well, then you're not really caring about protecting subjects, because research can do so much for society and other people. But and then I could, but research is not risk-free. I will say that, and it's hard. It's a hard goal to have, to protect volunteers.
Well, talk about what you've seen, trends in that particular tension, promoting research or protecting subjects. I mean, over 30, 40 years, what did it start like, and how have you seen it change?
And again, taking into consideration that the issues have changed because of advancements in science, I think that there's almost a pendulum. I think certainly when I started in the 70s, there was the expectations for protecting subjects was significantly lower than today. So there are many more protections. The kinds of things that we would have approved and have felt comfortable with in the 70s is not what we would be willing to approve or feel comfortable with in 2013. And I can tell you, I'm not even sure what it will be like in 2014, let alone looking at 2020, all right? Because science has changed so much, and knowledge has changed so much. And I don't know. And I think currently, with these changes in science, we have to change our focus. So if you said to me, wait a second, what should you change? What needs to be changed with our program? There's not enough time today. But one thing that I think is dramatically changed, and which will continue to need to be changed, is we put so much emphasis on initial review. Let's make sure that everything that's being proposed is appropriate. And I don't disagree with that. But I think the real problems, the real potential harms to subject actually can occur at the implementation stage. So I think there needs to be more focus on quality improvement, quality assurance, and what's happening once that research is being implemented. I mean, if we truly want to improve protections for human subjects. But it's never going to work exactly right. And I struggled whether I should talk about this or not, but it's never, you can't, if you're a subject, and you understand this, all right, if having been a subject advocate, if you're a subject, we think approving IRBs and investigators, we have an image of what's really happening. But that may not be what's really impacting or happening with that subject. And I'm not going to give all the details, but about mid-career for me, maybe early to mid-career, there was a family member. And it's on my husband's side. And basically, he entered a device study, clinical trial at a major research institution, major, well-known human research protection group, by the way. I knew them at that point. And it was a phase 1 clinical trial, first time in humans, first person to ever have this device. Now, I understood what that meant and tried to explain it to the family and thought they understood, and they went through the surgery, and he came out and something had gone wrong. So they put him back in the surgery, and he ended up with two stents, 2 devices. And since he seemed okay, everybody was okay with it, but then they dropped him from the study. Just like that, because, 2 stents, we can't use his data. And never had any more contact with him, and within 3 months, he had passed away. Suddenly. And I wanted, like I know all about this, right? So I wanted to try to get the family to have an autopsy and at least got them to call the company. The company wasn't interested, by the way. They weren't interested. And what I discovered is that really from the family's perspective, this was clinical care. After all that talking and after all that informed consent process, and there was a real informed consent process, although I wasn't physically present when it was done, the family, my family now, just really thought it was clinical care. And I never could, and finally my husband said, honey, this is not your job. You need to let my family work through this the way they can and what is in their best interest at this point. And they did. And I did call the IRB at this institution to express some concern that at least, it seemed like to me there should have been some ethical interest or obligation. Not legal, I wasn't worried about suing, but there should have been something more than what there was. And so that sort of taught me that, as an IRB, you think you're approving thing, and as a researcher, you think everything is so clear. And then really, these were intelligent people. But they really never, I don't think they ever, for them, it was clinical care. And whatever happened to him was just clinical result. And that could have been that was true, but I would have liked to have understood better what happened. So yeah, I think protection of human subject is very difficult. And it makes it challenging for research administrators, for investigators, and for subjects.
What would have had to happen for you to be more satisfied with this situation?
I think, and I'm not sure anything could have changed the outcome, but I think that if you enroll a subject, the first subject, into a phase 1 clinical trial, and it doesn't go well, the operation didn't go well, that there should be at least an ethical obligation to follow, so that what that individual did, at least it contributed to science, or contributed to maybe developing a product that would be useful. And I thought that at some point the IRB and the investigator and the industry had more of an obligation to show an interest in what happened, and an interest in follow-up with this individual. Not for the rest of his life, but I mean, it was, timing-wise, it was just 3 months later. And so it's getting back to this concept that I don't think that it's strictly a matter of what you review and you approve and you want it to be ethically designed, but then what happens afterwards in the implementation. And I don't think a company or researchers are obligated for the next 50 years, all right? I mean, that's not reasonable. But I do think that there are certain ethical obligations that you have to consider, and then ensuring that that research is implemented as you thought it was appropriately designed for human research subjects.
You mentioned a little while ago that in the beginning of your career you had a difficult time explaining what you did to other people. How do you explain now what you do to your family members or to somebody who asks you?
I'll say to somebody that if you do research with animal subjects or with human beings, that there are certain ways of treating people or animals fairly, correctly, and as a result, the government has developed a series of regulations to make sure you do it appropriately, that's in the best interest for either the human subject or humanely in terms of animal care. And it's simply like, I use the analogy, you go to a CPA, you go to an accountant to help you do your taxes because those regulations are so complicated, you need somebody to help you fill them out. Well, institutions and researchers need people to help them understand the complexities of the regulations and the ethical principles that underlie what they're doing. And so I'm sort of like I'm there to help them understand the current regulatory and ethical expectations.
Sometimes principal investigators feel that the IRB is this annoying obstacle that they have to overcome in order to do their research. How have you worked toward creating more friendly or collaborative or functional relationships between investigators and IRBs?
You, one, have to know where the framework is, and two, you need to listen. I think the most important thing that we can do is listen.
We who?
I'm talking about IRBs and
the administrators need to listen.
And administrators and IRBs need to listen to their researchers, ask smart questions. If you don't ask the right question, you may not reach the right answer. So ask smart questions listen to the answers. And if you listen, and if you know where that framework is, then you can maybe find ways. So is it really necessary to do 500 copies? Yes or no? All right. Does that improve protection of humans? Or are there things within that framework that you can do to make it easier? And if you listen and understand it, sometimes when you listen, you figure out that that's really ethically not something that was in the framework. So then you're able to explain, let me explain to you why you can't do that under this. Ethically, have you thought about it this way? Have you considered, is there another way you can get the data you need that would minimize any risk or harm to the subjects? And in my experience is that researchers are very ethical and want to do the right thing. Now, I'm not saying everybody is, but no, you don't find everybody being perfectly ethical in this world. But I think overall, my experience since 1979 has been that most researchers want to do the right thing. So if you'll listen, if you understand the framework, you can work with people to find how can we get you to the point where you can collect valid data, but minimize the harms as much as possible for the research participant.
Can we talk a little bit about how you spread the good word nationally? that part of your philosophy, that we need to understand the framework that we operate within on a daily basis and
shaping the national.
Yes, please tell me about how does that play out for you?
Well, now we're back to my mom.
Okay.
Mother had me giving speeches when I was a kid, which most people didn't do that, and I had a grandmother having me read poetry. So for me, I just took something I like to do, even though it scares me. Even doing this interview, made me nervous. Even though it scares me, a lot of what I have done has not been so much publications as presentations, and in addition, I've done a lot of one-on-one. Now that again takes a commitment from Steve Selwitz, my husband, to be willing to let me spend this extra time, and University of Kentucky commitment to let me spend this extra time. But you do a lot of that on weekends and at nights. That's what you do. But I have given speeches for a variety of different groups: PRIM&R, Society of Research Administrators, INCURA, Office of Human Research Protection, give speeches. I have served as a mentor through the PRIM&R mentoring program. I'm mentoring a young woman from Montana right now, so that's one-on-one. We have a conference call once a month. I have tried to mentor my staff. So teaching there's lots of different ways to teach. Some is by giving presentations, some is by writing. I have been an author in some cases, but that's not really my strength. One-on-one mentoring. Since email has been introduced, I get so many questions, and sometimes I'm slow in responding, but I have tried to really take the time to answer people that have questions. I have an NIH grant. Don Fraser is our PI. For 15 years we've done outreach to minority serving institutions, and I've loved doing that because that's again part of this education module. I've been involved with CITI. I've been involved with so many different groups.
Do you feel pretty comfortable that your message is well received? Are you frustrated or satisfied, or you sure darn wish it was better, or what?
It could always be better. It could always be better. As far as shaping the national framework, I have served on several national committees, and sometimes have been pleased that I really made a difference, and sometimes felt like I spent a lot of time, but there weren't any effective changes as a result, and I found that frustrating. But the kinds of message I send out in my presentations. I've overall been satisfied. I've made so many friends. I have learned so much from so many audiences. I mean, you learn by teaching. If you can teach, you learn as much as, now we're back to the listening. Although my husband would probably say I'm not a very good listener, but I do think listening is a key to being a successful teacher as well as an administrator. And but I haven't felt frustrated by those efforts. I have felt some frustration at wanting to make changes or seeing some rules that have come out that to me appear to be more bureaucratic than they were effectively protecting human subjects, or for that matter, animals as well. So it's finding that balance.
Can you think of an instance or an event that you're particularly proud of, that you were personally involved in, or a department or group that you're working with were involved in something you're proud of?
I have been proud of my efforts to establish research administration as an accepted profession. I think in the 70s, late 70s, the 80s, early 90s, that not me alone, there were so many of us working toward that goal. The fact that PRIM&R embraced that as a goal, and it really, I think, did a lot to we couldn't have done it if we hadn't had PRIM&R embracing the view that there needs to be a professional administrator engaged, and that it should be someone that's respected in terms of what they do and what kind of contribution they can make. So I'm very proud of those efforts, but I don't think it was just because of Ada Sue. I think it was because there was a group of us that were very committed to that outcome, that it was something that was needed, and I'm very proud of it. Now nobody questions that there needs to be research administrators.
How about, is there an instance of regret that you have in your career when, if you look back on something, an issue or an event, you think, wow, I wish that had been a little different?
Well, there are always lots of things. I mean, I suspect, I have a saying in the office. I don't know where I heard this saying, but I've said this to my staff so many times, and they go, oh, God, here we go again. But often the problem I'm trying to solve today is the solution I implemented yesterday. Now think about that a minute. So you have a problem, you come up with all these great ideas, this vision of how we can solve this problem, and then it creates 12 new problems that you never thought about. All right? And everybody's experienced that, and I think that's part of administration. Another quote. I really use these. I can't help myself. Winston Churchill says, success is nothing more than going from failure to failure with undiminished enthusiasm. Now, I use that in almost every speech I give because, that's my career. I have plenty of regrets, but I have been able to maintain my enthusiasm for human subjects, my enthusiasm for research, my enthusiasm for the people that conduct research, for the people that volunteer to be in research, and for the people that administer research. But that doesn't mean I don't have regrets. I do.
It seems sometimes that the average person on the street does not really understand about the process of research review. What do you wish that person understood?
Several things. One is that I think that not all research, but they need to understand that research is not risk-free. I said something about that earlier. But there are, and research is research. It's not necessarily clinical care. And I think there's this huge misperception that some things are clinical care and other things are, where really it's research, which means that not everything that's being done is necessarily being done strictly for that individual. So I think that's one thing I want them to understand. That doesn't mean that it's not valuable. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't participate, but I think it's something that people need to understand. And then after that, they're just so much about this brave new world that maybe in 5 years it won't seem like such a brave new world. But we're whole genome sequencing. What do we do with that? I mean, what are the implications? Do we want should every newborn have a whole sequencing? What would be the implications for that baby if that's done? And so there are details depending on the nature of the research project.
How would you prepare somebody, an administrator of the future, to deal with some of these issues? What advice would you give them?
Well, I can tell you, an administrator of the future has got to be adept at managing change. And how do you do that? Well, I'm not a person that just loves change. But the reality is, if you're going to be successful in the future, you've got to recognize that the one constant will be change. That means you have to stay up to date. You've got to take those weekends and those nights, and when you get on a plane, and read. And you're not going to have time at work to do that. So you need to be reading to try to understand what's going to happen. And try to be thinking, how's the best way to manage it? And, if there's, ask me, one thing I think I have done well in my role at Kentucky was sort of seeing something coming and say, we need to go ahead and make a change. Like, we need to be moving into quality assurance now, because I think quality, and going ahead and recognizing that there were things that needed to be done. Okay. And so I think you're going to have to be able to manage change. And ethically, it's very challenging because the complexity of science and knowledge. But it's exciting, too. It's exciting. There is no telling what they'll be able, what would happen if you ever have grandkids, and if you ever have, there is no telling what their lives are going to be like compared to what it's even like right now.
Well, let's talk about PRIM&R a little bit. Your first PRIM&R meeting was, did you say 1979?
November 79.
I'm trying to do, that's a very long time ago. What changes have you noticed in PRIM&R since those early days?
PRIM&R is an amazing organization. I love PRIM&R. I love the people that have been associated with PRIM&R. And, the change is in the old days, there was a small, you go to a meeting, 100, 150 people, maybe. That's a big meeting. Now you go, it's 2,000, 2,500. I think PRIM&R has grown up in the area of research ethics, just like research administration as a profession has grown up. And PRIM&R has listened and been willing to change and to take on hard issues, even knowing that there may not be consensus and how those issues should be managed that are in the best interest of human subjects or humane care and treatment of animals. They've shaped individuals like, I don't know, I was just a little girl with a funny little accent, right? And I'm still, in many ways, just a little girl with a funny little accent, okay? But PRIM&R introduced me to new thoughts new concepts, helped me develop as a professional. And through that, I had the opportunity to make some of my very best friends are people that I know and love because of PRIM&R. And so I think, and the organization has changed. It's grown. It's had growing pains. I've been on the PRIM&R board since 1986. And what I have loved best about PRIM&R, besides the people, love the people like you, I've just loved meeting people and making friends, has been their commitment to quality. They've never wavered on that. That's the one thing since 1979 that has not changed. And I have thought that's important. So you say, what has changed in PRIM&R? Well, we've grown up, we've expanded, we've made a difference in a number of critical areas. But where PRIM&R has never changed is they've truly been committed to quality. Whether it's quality programming, quality quality publications. Now we have webinars, we have internet training, but their number one priority has never been, let's make more money. Or that hasn't been their priority. Their priority has always been, how can we do the highest possible quality? I'm sure peoples and perspectives, they want it to be the highest quality they can possibly do. And that hasn't changed. So there are some good values. There are some values that you don't want to change and that you hope never will. In terms of human subjects research, if I could make any change, I think I would want the ethics of human subjects research to become, from high school on, an integral part of the training for anyone that is going to end up being a scientist. So that would be one thing, so that it's interwoven, Donna Shalala said her ethics must be as good as our science, and I believe that. Our ethics need to be as good as our science, but to do that, it needs to be an integral part in every aspect of an individual's education that leads to being a researcher. So that's what I changed there. If you ask me, well, what would you change in regulations? And again, we don't have enough time. On the other hand, I'm struggling with that right now in 2013 because there were so many changes that have been proposed, and now there's emphasis to move to the single IRB mechanism. And I haven't fought it, I've embraced it, but now that I've been embracing it, I'm seeing all the new problems that are being created that people didn't think through. So I think short term, I think we need to slow down a little bit. Now this is 2013, and begin to look, if we're going to move to a single IRB model, how do we do it most effectively, instead of suddenly it's, well, everybody's going to do it, so people are doing it right, left, and we aren't giving as much consideration, I think, as we should on how do we do it, and we do it right. Because if you go to that model, there are still some things like if you're doing something in your facility and you have an investigational drug service and you have conflict of interest and you have, I can go on and on and on, all these other things that have to be coordinated within your facility, how do you do that in a way that ensures protection when the actual review is being done by someone that is separate? And I think all of this can be worked out and done appropriately. And then who's going to pay? This is now in our country a time of fiscal constraint, fiscal challenges that I have not seen since I started in '78. And everywhere I turn, there are new regulations and new rules, but there's no money to do it appropriately. So what else would I change? I would change that if we're going to have mandates, we need to also fund those mandates so that we can implement them correctly. because we're getting to the stage. Every time you turn around, there's a problem. Well, we've got to bring this 12 layers of regulation, but nobody's thinking about how do you pay for those 12 layers, and are they really value added? So what would I change? I wouldn't have another federal regulation issued that was not truly valued added, and also there were plans for how it was going to be funded.
What is it about your personality or your personal skill set that you think makes you good at what you do and helps you to bring energy and inspiration to your work?
First of all, I think that everybody has some special skills. I really believe that. I believe that when you hire someone, that it really becomes, you have to figure out what are their strengths and then change the job in a way to maximize those strengths. Okay. And it goes beyond just their skill set. It might be also you can't change. I lucked out. I have a husband that's supportive, that lets me work weekends and nights. Maybe he's relieved that I'm working weekends and nights. But Steve Selwitz has been great. So I had a supportive environment at home. Not everybody does. So you have to look at it. So in my case, I have a natural enthusiasm. I mentioned enthusiasm before for life. I had opportunity young to do a lot of public speaking, and there's nothing that said that if I was going to work in research administration that I should go out and give speeches. Okay. I had instilled in me at a very young age the importance of working hard and trying to do the best you can. That was the way my grandparents were, the way my parents were. It's the way my husband is. And as a result, everything I try to take, I give it my all. I try to do the best I can. I'm not always successful, but I can. So those are the skill sets: enthusiasm, just being committed to really giving it my all, to try to do the best I can. I'm not the smartest person that ever walked the face of the earth. I'm not, but so I can't say that it's intellectually that was the reason, but my commitment to a very strong work ethic, coupled with enthusiasm, coupled with just the fact that I can give speeches. Not as good as I'd like to, I can tell you that. But I think all of those things is what I brought to it. Now, I have changed. I mean, thanks to groups like PRIM&R, I have grown intellectually. And I've also grown just through reading the research that I see done at the University of Kentucky. And that's helped. But that didn't bring that to the table. I have truly loved my job. I have truly loved interacting and working with researchers, with research administrators, with human volunteers. I admire human participants so much, and I admire researchers so much. And I don't think everybody gets to say that. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And I'm grateful that I've had the support I've had from my dad, Dan Hudson, and from my mother, and from my husband, Steve Selwitz, and from the University of Kentucky. Because I could have left, I could have gone to other jobs, and I chose to stay at the same institution. And they have been extremely supportive, and they've had a vision for protection of human subjects as well. And I'm very thankful.
Well, on behalf of PRIM&R and People and Perspectives, and Joan Racklin and myself, thank you for sharing your life and your story with me today. And I'm so happy that you will be part of the archives of People and Perspectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you.